And the gospel set me free. You know, I think that's why it was so personal, because I was a broken mess before Jesus. And to think like these people have never even had access to knowing, it just did something to us. So that's when Brandon and I were just like, Lord, whatever you want, like, are anything's on the table, like whatever.
Jessica, welcome to the happy hour.
Jamie, thank you for having me. I'm so pumped to be here.
Well, welcome all the way from Nebraska, too.
I know. It's just like, it's so cold still.
Are you in Lincoln?
Yes, Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay, I've been to Lincoln, Nebraska one time that I 100% remember.
And
this is the story of my life. It's like I'll be places. Like I went to Boston in the spring. And I'm like, this is my first time to Boston. It's so awesome. And then I'm like, I was here 3 years ago with one of my kids on a trip. Like, I literally forget things so easily. So the one trip I remember is, if you have been around the happy hour for a long time, you know that this is a really weird thing I'm about to say, because I get really weird about it. But I ran in the Junior Olympics when I was
really?
Yeah, I'm very proud of it.
That's awesome.
When the Olympics come on, I tell my kids that I am an Olympian as well. Anyhow, all that to say, we had a meet in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Let's go.
I mean, I was in like 7th grade.
I'm sure it was the most memorable place you've ever been.
For a 7th grader, it was just like a track meet, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then I think I spoke in Nebraska once, but anyhow, well, welcome to Austin.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here. I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jess. Most people call me Jess. Only people who call me Jessie are those church people when you're growing up, and they're like, Jessie, and I'm like,
do you respond?
I do, because there's
weird.
like that group of people who can call you Jessie because they've known you your whole life. But other than that, just don't love Jessie. So I'm Jess. Yeah, I'm Jess Hotz. And moved to Lincoln, Nebraska not too long ago, which is from Kearney, Nebraska, for several years of my life, and kind of born and raised in small town Nebraska life. So that's me.
You're married?
Married to Brandon. He is absolutely incredible. We've almost been married 10 years.
Congrats.
In August.
Congrats.
So we're celebrating that this year.
That's awesome. This is our 4th and final episode in this series. Like, I at the happy hour, I don't do series a lot, but I decided last fall, I'm like, I want to do a series on unreached people groups. I've spent some time with David Platt and some radical stuff that they were doing, and I was just like, this is what I can do. This is my contribution, right?
I love it.
Because as people have been listening, especially with you and Andy on Wednesday, especially, even talking about mobilization and like, what do we do? For me, I was like, you know what? I can bring people's voices to people. So this is you're the finale.
That's so incredible, Jamie, because I was one of those people. David and his ministry has been so significant in my mobilization journey.
I hear a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically about David Platt, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
So you're our final episode talking about unreached people groups, and I love it that every person has brought something different. And when I was looking to fill this spot, I was like, this would be really great, because we have partnered with you guys and a company that you own a lot at the happy hour, and that's great, and that's fun, and that's all the things. But I want to go deeper. So what I do know about you is that you run 2 organizations.
Yeah.
And I want to hear how this all started. So give us a little backstory on how you got where you are today in 2023.
Yeah. So Brandon and I meet on a short-term trip to South Asia.
Okay.
And find out on this trip, well, one, I didn't know how to share the gospel, Jamie. So I'm on this trip to share the gospel with people who've not heard or, very little access to the gospel. And I'm like, I don't really know how to do that super well. So I see Brandon, super confident, just like evangelist. And I'm like, will you help me learn how to share the gospel? Yeah. And that was kind of it. And then at the end of that trip, we really connected. Did you think he was
cute? Were you like, well, this cute boy, will you help me?
There's such a story here.
Okay, we don't have time.
But yes, capital Y, yes. Just Brandon's incredible. And so he just kind of oriented me to share my faith. And that's where we met. And so we met, halfway around the world in South Asia. Both end up, I'm like, where are you from? Nebraska. Right? Yeah. Small town in Nebraska. Both went to something called a country school. So that's really where this journey starts, because we are on this trip. We're being exposed to just a gravity of intense, weighty issues. And I would say I'm from a pretty, I didn't grow up with a ton of exposure. My grandfather was a pioneer missionary, helped found New Tribes Mission Aviation. It's now Ethnos 360. So I had some tribal missions experience, maybe awareness. But as far as what was going on in our time, we were just exposed to a lot of the trafficking that was happening in this nation, and meeting people who were like, we were like, do you know who Jesus is?
Mm-hmm.
Is that who you're going to pick up at the airport?
No,
I mean, that
no concept
that
of, yeah.
yes, that's what we're talking about here. And I'm like, it gripped me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing on a rooftop of a place we were staying, looking over this city, and it was like I had a calling. Mm-hmm. The Lord was like, I'm calling you to the nations. Now, I didn't exactly know what that meant then. Later, we got back from this trip. Brandon and I ended up dating, getting married not too long after.
I love it.
And just setting our hearts on the nations. We're like, we have got to be about that. Now, in that time, we just started going to missions conferences because we're like, well, it sounds like a good place to start. Yeah. And that was where I was confronted with the reality of what's called an unreached people group. Mm-hmm. And it was a tool that they used to just kind of paint and display this. It was a long black wall with columns and columns of names of ethnic populations that were living beyond access to the gospel. And the gospel set me free. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's why it was so personal, because I was a broken mess before Jesus. Mm-hmm. And to think like these people have never even had access to knowing, it just did something to us. Yeah. So that's when Brandon and I were just like, Lord, whatever you want. Like, are anything's on the table? Like, whatever. We're willing. How
old were you then?
22.
A baby.
Yeah. No, really.
And I only bring that up because I'm like, it makes me so happy to see like someone so young go, I want to give my entire life to not only just like missions, but to like unreached people groups. Yeah. Whereas a lot of people in the States still aren't even aware of that. I hope they are now if they're happy hour listeners, because we've been talking about it for 2 weeks. But even just that concept of like, this is what I do. Okay, so you and Brandon are 22, newly married, and you're like, God, this is what God has for us.
This is it. Like, we were like, this is what we want to do with our whole lives. And is we want to be in some way a part, Lord, of what you're doing. Because we learned about this whole biblical narrative, right? Like the storyline of God is on this rescue mission for humanity. And we're like, we now, more than ever before in history, we know a lot, for the most part, we know where these people are. And we know who they are. We got to know how to get to them. We have more scripture access than we've ever had. And we're like, oh my, we want to be about that. Yeah. And so that is what propelled us to move back to South Asia for a season to discover what God had. And honestly, it was when people ask me like, oh, you tell our kids this story. I'm like, you don't want me to tell your kids this story, because we did nothing put together. It was like we had no mission sending agency. We had no strategy. We raised support in 2 months. Wow. And we got on a plane and we moved to South Asia. Uh-huh. And people were like, oh, it's crazy. I'm like, crazy. Yeah. And you look back and I'm like, I don't know what we were thinking. We just wanted to be where Jesus wanted us to be, and that's where we felt like it was. And so that lands us back up in South Asia. And what we see as kind of God's genius in this whole thing as being now that we wouldn't have known then was that by not going in the way that was more a traditional route, we were able to go and serve right under local leadership, like local pastors. Yeah. And they couldn't believe that our people would send us. Our parents would send us at 22 under a local pastor in leadership. So that broke down so many walls, and they just started kind of like giving us insight. Like we were like, our big thing, which kicked off these ministries, was we want to be a part of serving you however we can and taking the gospel to the unreached. Would you give us a job? So when people ask, like, how did you start these ministries? Like, we didn't really. Like, they did. Yeah. And our goal and desire became, how do we serve and accelerate those most near to, culturally and geographically, the unreached? You just want to be wind in their sails, fuel on their fire. And that eventually emerged into the ministries they are now. So,
how long were you guys there?
We were only there for 8 months. And we had some complications, and so we came back kind of discovering a pathway toward this. And that's when we had met our first group of believers that were significantly persecuted, had all sorts of setbacks in their family, culture, just generally. And we're like, how could we help you overcome some setbacks and birth some dreams? Wow. And that's really when we became about sustainability in frontier missions, something that as far as just income generation for local believers as a key part of their engagement strategy in taking the gospel to a new place and people, which was kind of unique.
Is that how Activate Global started? Is that what started
Yep,
first?
Exactly.
So, I think I'd love for you to explain this just for a lot of listeners to understand, because we've been talking about this for 2 weeks. And so there is a little bit of understanding now, but even you said, like, you met people and they're telling you their stories. They turn and follow Jesus the same way that you and I have. And yet it costs them everything.
Yes.
It has the potential to cost them everything. And so you meet these new believers and they still want to follow Jesus, even with all the costs and all the persecutions. And so you saw there's a really great need for them to be able to have money.
Yeah.
Because they can lose their jobs. They can lose their families. And so is that how, talk to us a little bit about what you saw and then what Activate Global stepped in to do.
Yeah, that is what we saw. We saw that there were some either near to or of the same culture, a remnant of people who were following Jesus, who are seeking to live missionally and dynamically engage the people groups around them. So we just never wanted to leave them out of the equation. We actually think they're the key breakthrough point in the equation. And so when we just started listening, how can we best accelerate and serve? So part of it was just the degree of persecution and opposition that they were facing to just sustain livelihoods. Two, another part and kind of dynamic part of the picture was they had new places they wanted to send workers to. And so, the sustaining of their livelihoods, as well as the training they need, just discipleship training and forming a simple church in some of the contexts that we work in now. But then it was like, they were struggling just living, surviving. Because they came from strong and pretty intense backgrounds. One of our partners, his own family was about to kill him. I'm sorry to be graphic, but he was going to kill him in an honor killing, is what they called it. If we kill you in this way, it'll redeem honor to our family. And as they were bringing this knife down over his neck, the earth shook and his brother fell over. And it just scared them all so much. They said, God is with you. And he ran and was able to get away. And it's been this long process and journey of him saying God redeemed my wife and he redeemed my family, and now they're on mission together. And we saw these stories, right? Everything just starts with stories. It was just, we saw families struggling and we're like, we want to help you with missional training and focus, but small business development, because we saw that these businesses were able to sustain them, give them identity in the community. So now I've been able to help kickstart several businesses for local believers on the ground. But it's been a powerful thing.
Okay, you said several businesses. I'll be the one to brag. Okay. Today, Activate Global serves in 15 of the world's most challenging nations, where they have launched 384. She said a couple. 384 businesses for local church planters, trained 637 leaders, partnered in planning 568 simple churches, and have engaged 142 unique unreached people groups. That's amazing.
No, it's been powerful, because each one of those numbers, it's like, I just heard this last week about my husband was in East Africa on the field seeing these businesses, encouraging the believers, doing training. There's a woman whose husband left her because they were so poor. They only had one egg to feed their family, and she decided to feed it to her child instead of her husband. So he came home and he was really upset and he left her. And she was a part of this faith network, this church planting network that knew about her. And so they said, hey, you need that Activate Global training. And because she was a believer. And they trained her, not just to help her in that moment, but for a life. Because we talk about that a lot. And empowerment's hard. Yeah. It's harder than an initial yes. I mean, we need to do that too sometimes. But it's it's a life thing, not like a now thing. And she took this training, and now she's feeding everyone in the village chickens, and we're like, that's great.
Her
It's one of the
yes,
exactly. And it's like, whoa, that's one of the 384. It's her just faithfully serving and proclaiming the gospel and working with her hands in her place and space. And again, all of the areas that we serve are only and always among the unreached. A lot of times among people groups we call frontier people groups, so it's 0.1% or less, meaning we just need a gravity of focus on those places to be able to see some gospel engagement happen.
I would love to hear your reasoning behind that. David touched on that in his episode last week about how much missions money in the States actually goes towards unreached people groups. It's pretty low.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
So I would love to hear, like, what was it for you? I mean, you've talked a lot about what you've seen and stuff, but it could be very easy for you to say, like, most of our stuff will go here. But you seem very, like, adamant that this is where we will serve. What is that for you?
Total undergirding and just conviction, Jamie. It's just like the Lord, he's like, I've called you these people. And the way Brandon always describes it, it'd be like if you're picking up a really heavy log and like there's like 50 people on this end of the log, but there's like one guy on the other side. So we just feel like the Lord highlighted that for us. And for us, it's just like total obedience thing. Like, just like, it's unreached people. And there are times where we work in certain nations that, like in East Africa, for example, I'll say Ethiopia. Like, the Ethiopian church recognizes it. They are mobilizing young people, older people, like everyone like crazy to engage the unreached around them. So it's our missions, like David Platt says it, fields become mission forces. And that's why that's so important, is because that's what we see happening around the world, is that we have got to focus. I was listening to, Paul Eshelman. He helped create something called the Jesus Film. Super impactful. And we were at a missions conference once. It sobered me. I was just super young, right? Like, youngest female in every room I'm in, pretty much. And there's these just amazing missional giants. And someone asked Paul Eshelman, why are the unreached still unreached? And they're getting in the elevator. The doors are closing. And Paul just looks at him and he said, a lack of focus. And the doors closed. It was like cinematic.
Yeah, for real.
And it gave me goosebumps. And I was like, a lack of focus. And I think that speaks to that, as the Lord asked us to focus, to take it to those who've never heard. And I was just in North Africa a few months ago, walking around, and there was a people group that we knew of. We didn't know of any known believers in the people group. We're like, can we go pray for a household of peace? Do you know anyone who would welcome us in? And our local partner's like, yeah, we know. And I go into this room, and there's this pregnant mama, and my spirit just highlighted her to me, and I was like, can we sit with us, And do you know about Jesus the Messiah, Isa Masih? And she goes, I heard about him on the TV once. And I was just like, what did you think? I want to know more. And she's like sitting there just like so wanting to know more, but so didn't know anyone within the like vicinity of her life and reality who could help her understand more. And so those stories to me iterate the focus that God gave us to saying it's unreached people. Jess, we have got to focus on taking the gospel to those who've never even had the opportunity to turn and follow in that way.
How do you guys do this without just you and Brandon? Like, explain to it, like, if someone's listening and they're like, how do I be a part of this? What do y'all look like with helping people join you in your mission?
Totally. We have an incredible small team. We also have global teams around the world. So locals, nearly all of our infrastructure is from people from the nations that we serve. And we also have trainers that are on the Activate Global team who are helping us. And we're small right now. We're building curriculum and building teammates to serve over nations and all of our local partnerships in country. And then we have ways for people here to be able to join this and go, what does that look like for everyday people? One of our very kingdom businesses is what we call them. One of our favorites is called Elevate. It's one of the 384 that we have started. And that was a leather workshop, all focused on the kingdom. And people have bought Elevate products. They've been able to join our prayer team, give to Activate Global. And what we do with that is we train and we kickstart small businesses for church planners around the world. So just that awareness piece of going, that's where it started for us. It was just like, we just decided to read the word and go, oh, I think this is like literally applies to us. Like we took it personally. And that's when life started kind of upending for us in a really cool way.
I want to talk about Elevate in a minute, but I also want to stop here for a second. You've mentioned several times that you heard from the Lord, or this is where you feel the Lord has you and Brandon. And I know a lot of people could be listening and think to themselves, like, what does that actually mean? And what does that look like for you? And so I'd love it if you would just like share a little bit about like, how does those intimate moments with the Lord, how does that push you into what you're doing now?
I feel like it's what got me where I am, and it's what keeps me. Like, this is where I get emotional because I just love the Lord. my abiding in him, like, it's like I can serve, but not out of angst anymore. And the reason I'm emotional is that wasn't always me, Jamie. Like, I've been a striver, I've been a achiever, go-getter, like all these things. And the Lord just nestled me in. He's just brought me under the shadow of his wing. It's just like, we're going together. It's not just what you're doing for me, Jess, it's what you're doing with me. And that's the only thing that's kept me in this. Because, leadership, it's hard. It's like trying to build team and make a difference and see where we're supposed to go and discern direction and under a fleshy, like, human person, right? Like, how? And the Lord just, like, helped me to see how much fun it is when we go with him. And so he's just in every room, just trying to go in the peace and the presence of the Holy Spirit. Like, he's just in us. He's everywhere we go. And so that's huge for me, is leading from following, from being the first follower, listening, and just enjoying that. I don't know, just like so many of my moments, I felt like even just in 2020, I had a really strong kind of speaking to that, like hearing from God in a really powerful way. It doesn't happen to me all the time in this sense, but this day it did. And I was just crying, worshiping God in my room by myself. We didn't really have chairs in the room yet, so it was like just a rug. And I end up on the floor just praying, crying out to the Lord for more teammates to come join us in this work. And I just felt like that inaudible kind of voice of the Lord. And he's like, you can ask me for a team, but Jess, I'm asking you to ask me for the nations. And I was like, that's audacious. Like, I am this little bird. This is who I am, Lord. I'm a little girl from Nebraska. Like, and you're asking me to ask you for the nations? And he was like, that's what I'm asking you to ask me for. So I'm like, he didn't say if he was going to give it or not, but it was just like, he's asking me to ask him for him. And I feel like that's what's grounded me. That's what's helped us to know, Lord, is it right or left? There have been times, literally, we were praying, Lord, do you want us to go east or west? With a country expansion opportunity we had. And we heard him say west. And then we end up in a nation, and a local goes, we were telling him this story. It's his testimony. How'd you end up here? He's like, you know what our country means, right? The name means west, the place where the sun sets. And I'm like, of course it does,
That's where God wants to go.
That's where he's calling us. So sometimes feel like a stronger sense of clarity. Other times it's just really scared faith. But either way, it's all just coming from there. It's the only place I feel good about it advancing from.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier that I want to touch on for just a second. Is you said, you were 22. This is when your whole life was upending, all the things. And a lot of people in that age bracket, 18 to 25, will feel this calling on their life. And the most maybe discouragement or the most difficultness about going to the nations would come from parents. And I am a parent with a 19-year-old. Right. Okay. And so it's all fun and games.
Yeah.
It's all just conversation until it's your own child.
Yes.
And I would like to say confidently that I would be supportive of my kid. Like, I'll just say that. And it will let it be, Lord. But I would just love to hear, not even to talk about your parents in general by any means, but like, what was it that at 21, 22, that you had the confidence to be able to say, like, I think I can do this? Because I think there are a lot of people who are in their 40s who are trying to figure out that confidence. But there are a lot of people who are in their 50s who are parenting kids in that age. And listen, we want to empower our kids. At the end of the day, as much as you're like, that would be really hard for my kid to live in another country or live in a place where there's persecution for being a believer. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I really think most people following Jesus would want to lay their heads down at night and say, God, thank you for a child who wants to serve you. So all that to say, can you talk about that confidence? Like, and I know you're going to tell me it came from God, but I just really also want to get like what were the things that helped you? What were the things that helped your parents? Like, what did that look like for you at a young age?
Yeah, I think it was like my parents raised us in things that maybe you can't even articulate because they were so part of your reality. So I'm trying to think, Lord, help me answer this, because like I mentioned, my grandfather was a pioneer. So we grew up, and there was a little trauma around that in my family because that was back in the era of missions where that was a hard era of missions. Like if you're a missionary kid, you ended up in boarding school, and that may or maybe wasn't a good experience for you. My dad ended up, there's just pain there, right? It's just hard. And, but yet my parents didn't have much as far as earthly resources, material things, but we always sent support to missionaries. It was always like this really well talked about thing, and it was like, this is a part of the kingdom. So I just think having awareness about it was really critical. And then I saw my dad kind of go for a dream. Like he was a professional fisherman, I don't know, and I just thought, like, I grew up around a context where he went for it, you know, and I think that maybe sewed into it. It's like, you can just go for stuff. Can you? I don't know, I guess you can. Also, I didn't realize that you needed qualifications. I'm just saying, I didn't know that people had like master's degrees in missiology and PhDs. I didn't grow up around a strong, like, go to Christian college. They just went to a state university. I just didn't know that you couldn't, or that you shouldn't. Now it's funny because I'm like, I've tried to go get equipped in different ways to just do the mission at hand, but I certainly didn't know you needed it before you went. Like, that was just it. I just didn't know any better.
I love it. It reminds me of my friend Katie, who was on the show too, like not decades, she's young, but she just moved to Uganda, just like picked up and like, I'm going to go live in Uganda, and I'm 18 and I'm going to change people's lives.
Yes.
And yeah.
It was kind of like that. But I think you're right. I think parents have a critical role in solidifying you in a way where you have an opportunity and you're like, I think I could do that.
I know. And even when you were saying like, we just went, like, we didn't know what we were doing. When you get older, you're like, why would you do that? But I look back at my own life and things very different than what you experienced. Aaron and I did this. We just moved to another city once with no jobs. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like, I'm sure our parents were like, wait, you don't have jobs? And we're like, we don't have jobs, but we're moving. And we found this apartment. Crazy. And so there is something really simple and beautiful about that, though, that I think as the older you get and you start to like reason more, I would think that even I would miss that a little bit. Like, wait, can't we just go? Let's just go and see what happens. And following God, I mean, obviously for his protection and what he's supposed to have for you there. Okay, I want to talk about Elevate. So that is what I knew you from. And so everything you've said up until now has been brand new information for me. I'm like, Elevate to me is like, you see an iceberg, it's like the very tip, and you're like, oh, there's an entire thing underneath here. So even until you just said this, I didn't realize that Elevate was one of those businesses that you started. And so I want you to tell us about Elevate. And why do I know about Elevate? This feels like a weird question. If you have helped start 384 businesses, why do I know about Elevate? What made that Elevate into like bringing it to the marketplace here?
Totally. So I would say Elevate, the reason we know about Elevate a little more here is Elevate was our first application point. Can missional businesses designed to bring the kingdom, can they accelerate frontier mission? Does that work? We didn't know. We found a group of people in this nation that had this dream on their heart, a leather workshop. So
what nation can you say?
I cannot, no.
What area can you say that?
South Asia.
Okay, there you go.
And they were the sweetest people.
Can I pause you for a second? Because people might be wondering, why can't you say?
Yeah, that's a real thing.
I know. So can you educate the listeners? Totally. Because it can be like I'm totally cool with it, but I'm always going to ask in case you can. But can you explain why?
Yeah.
Because everyone these last 2 weeks has done this, but we've never said why. So can you tell us?
Yeah, our nations of implementing are sensitive because of the people's lives connected to these stories. Part of me in so many circumstances is like, shout it from the rooftops. Their stories are incredible. We just know that we have to have a degree of caution around that because of the persecution, the very real persecution they do face, both governmentally and their social setting, people around them, their culture, as well as their family. And so that's why it's sensitive, though they're all bringing the kingdom. I mean, and they're just sharing the love of Jesus where they are, and with the children just doing beautiful things. It still poses a real risk to their lives, particularly if you look at the 10 most persecuted nations in the world. Activate Global currently works in 7 of them, and those aren't like persecuted. They're persecuted for a reason. And so we're just going, oh, Lord, would you give us wisdom to steward conversations that would protect your people?
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on with Elevate.
Yeah. So this was the very first thought. And I had spent a hot minute in the fashion industry, like a assistant to somebody else, like just not much, just very, very raw exposure.
You got your toe in.
Yep. And I got my toe right back out. Okay. I was like, I'm moving to South Asia. Like, I'm gonna be a missionary. Like, this is not my thing. And then what ends up kind of unfolding in front of us is that like opportunity creation is actually really critical. And this group had a dream of a leather workshop. And I was like, why leather? We're like, oh, this is just what we know. Yeah. So it wasn't a whole lot to it other than that was just background for these people. Like, it was their dream. So when people ask about Elevate and the line itself and the leather and all this stuff, that just wasn't at all on our radar. We were just saw a dream in them, and we're like, we want to help birth and accelerate that dream. And so I end up like, you know, after the toe in, toe out of the fashion industry, I end up on like just a little notepad, just sketching up a wallet. I didn't even, honestly, I was very unaware that this was even like a whole industry. Okay. And at the time, it was kind of an emerging industry as far as like ethical or cause-driven brands. I didn't really know much about that at all. And so I was like, but I just wanted to create something I thought our people would love. And this was just the very first place for us. And so that's why it's one of the many. But what we realized, what Elevate was beautiful, and this leather workshop was doing amazing things. But when I looked at that map of the unreached people groups on joshuaproject.net, you can find a map with a lot of red dots on it. And I looked at that map and I'm like, man, if we're banking on Elevate only to be able to generate income for this, we're limiting ourselves. But if we help teach the principle of what became Elevate, the principle could impact thousands. And to scale, and when we share it with other organizations and we develop it more and staff it more and resource it more, that could really innovate this whole space. And I was like, again, being with the Lord, and I was like, help me think better about this. So Elevate was beautiful, but limited in some ways. And so we were like, we want to be about training a whole bunch of people to do what they just did. And that's when what we Activate Global calls our Kingdom Business training program became a thing. And Brandon just ends up writing a 200-page small business curriculum. And he's like, I don't know, like that. He's just a people guy. So he's like, I don't know how that even happened. But yeah, that's when we really decided to take what the Lord was blessing here and to grow it. But that growing it didn't necessarily look like products on Elevate's product line. It looked like the chicken hatchery with the woman in East Africa. And it looked like a taxi in the Horn of Africa. And it looked like this great donkey, and he has a bread cart behind the donkey in North Africa. And it looked like we wanted to localize the expression of the gospel rather than drive everything toward.
So Elevate was your first business that you did?
Exactly.
Wow.
Scary. I didn't know how to do a business.
And it probably is like, the other ones you listed, I think you picked the best one to market to the States rather than
especially
the
Texas.
donkey bread and the although people would love some chickens here. Okay, so I love the stuff that you guys do from Elevate, and that's how I was introduced to you, to you guys, to you for that. So everything is new. And so I really love that. And so Elevate, you guys, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to show you some of the stuff, okay? I'll show you right there. Okay, so can we give these away?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to give some things away. Okay, this is so fun. I love giving things away. I turn into like Oprah. I'm like,
she does it.
Okay, so tell us about, I have two different products here. And again, if you want to watch this, you can go to jamieivey.com/YouTube and you can watch the whole thing and see it. But we're going to give away two things on Instagram. So these two things are separate. We'll give away two winners. It'll start today that this show is airing. So tell us about this product right here.
Yes, this product was launched in collaboration with Christine DeMarco. So it's called the DeMarco, and it has a little strap inside there. And when you put that on, it's designed with a built-in wallet system. So in a snap, so the easy snap closure. I love this thing. Travel with it everywhere. It's the bag none of our teammates can live without, to be honest. Yeah. So if you asked, which one are you guys all carrying? Like we all carry.
Is this what you flew in with today?
Yes, it is. Okay. Because I put my passport right there in the bag, and then the cards are all there. Everything's accessible. It's perfect. So that is the DeMarco, huge crowd pleaser. The other one is
can you say this? We're not giving
this
this away.
This is coming soon.
But your sister's here, and she had this on her bag, and I was like, tell me about this.
Yes, this is coming soon. A little cozier strap.
I love this.
With a cute design. Yeah, we're excited about that.
Like, when is this launching?
Sneak peek.
Sneak peek, I know. Are we not supposed to show this? This is such a sneak peek. I love it. I love getting sneak peeks out of people when you didn't even plan on it.
I'm like, sweating. No, I'm kidding.
I know. You're
it's
like,
right.
wow, we weren't supposed to show this to the world. Right. And here we are. We can cut this out if you don't want to.
Yeah, no, this is fine.
I do love sneak peeks so
and I am sweating. I'm like, Sarah, tell me the answer.
Sarah, can we keep this in the show? Yes, Sarah said yes.
Fall. I think we're safe to say fall, right?
Fall. Sarah says summer.
We have to safely say fall. I don't know. Sarah, are you sure?
Okay, listen. Here's what we're going to do here.
Yeah. She runs the show.
We're going to say fall. Sarah runs the show. She says summer. So here it is. I will be adding this to my bag for sure. And then the second thing we're going to give away. Tell us about this.
This is the Nomad. It's a cute.
Also a crossbody.
Yes, also a crossbody. So the strap's inside there. And that zips around and it fans open. It's super fun. And this one just holds a little more. So if you can't get away with just your key fob, phone, and maybe sunglasses, if you need a little bit more, this is your go-to.
So this is the Nomad. This is the DeMarco. We're going to give away to 2 winners on Instagram, one of each of these. They will have the straps that come with them, just full disclosure so everyone knows.
Yes.
Because I'll be waiting to get my strap this summer.
Yeah, girl. Got you.
I love your products. We've had them before at our Happy Hour Lives and talk about them and stuff. And so super, super grateful for that. And guys, find that on Instagram. Okay, I would love to know, what are you reading these days?
Ooh, I am reading Don't Hold Back by David Platt. I'm just almost done with that.
I read it after. So I interviewed him in January, even though it just came out last week. And I had not read his book yet. But I had told him, hey, I'm not here to talk about your book. Sorry. I'm here to talk about the Unreached People Group. He was like, yes. I read that book already since I interviewed him. And I have already said it will go down as one of my top 5 books I read this year. Hands down already. Yeah. It's so good, you guys.
It is. It's really good. The pictures painted, it does something to you. I'm sure that you experienced that. Yeah. And it was just that itch. The itch of, I think we're all itching. I mean, this is in 2033. A lot of us are celebrating something called the 2000th Commission of the Great Commission, and we're. I mean, it's significantly.
Wait, I haven't heard about this.
Okay.
Now I've heard a lot of predictions about. Like I work a lot with Illuminations, Bible translations, and so they are like really looking for the next decade, 15 years. Okay, tell me about this.
So AD 2033, the 2000 years since the Great Commission. And I think kind of ushered in and made popular by Rick Warren, the Unreached People Group, Finishing the Task Collective. They're all part of. I remember my first Finishing the Task meeting. Again, only young female in the room.
I'm so
just
proud
crazy.
Of you. I wish I could have texted you before you walked in and be like, you walk in that room and you hold your head high because God has you here and you walk in.
It has not been me so many times. Just like, just kind of like, why am I here? You have to ask yourself that. I'm like, God, I just feel like this is what you're calling me to be. But yeah, so there's a collective of organizations, big and small, international, national, that are going, what would it look like if we lived like, if we lived like the next 10 years matter significantly in the next massive push in the Great Commission. Because like I was saying before, like we know who these people are. We know for the most part where they are. And we have a collective resource in the Great Commission. I mean, I was just talking to 2 brothers in a highly persecuted nation a few weeks ago and was like, how are you guys seeing people come to faith? Jamie, TikTok? Oh, I'm sorry.
TikTok
what?
Is what they said?
TikTok. They're like putting videos out on social media platforms to engage people who are what we call God-prepared people, seeking people to gauge interest. And so much of these parts of the world that are risky, we're like, huh? Like
my mind is so blown right now. Like I feel like I need to pause and take a moment.
Yes. So we're like, we have these platforms.
Because my teenagers are like, Mom, I saw it on TikTok. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's not true, guys. Now I'm like, okay,
I'm not saying I'm endorsing anything. I'm just like, but we have like this ability when when we're bringing whatever we have, right, and we're putting it all on the table, and like those statistics show us 1% just of missions giving, not global Christian giving, missions giving is going to unreached people. That's why with Activate Global we want to start small businesses, because they regenerate resources, and we're all of a sudden qualifying the marketplace in a dynamic way. Because if we're just relying on that $1 or whatever, I mean, it's limited, and so we're like, we got to be more ingenuitive and innovative about the way that we're seeing the Great Commission in our time. Not kidding. I mean, the South Koreans, they have this mission sending stuff that's nuts. Filipinos sending women to the Middle East in really unique ways, like just powerful. That's what we love to see, like the creative genius of our time. So that 2033 question is, what if we lived like in 10 years? These 10 years mattered a lot for the coming and the ushering in of the completion of the Great Commission in a significant way. Some people would say the start of the beginning. I don't know. I just love the idea of living like Jesus would come back. You know, I love living like that. And so we, of course, don't know. But it's just super fun to see people kind of rallying together. Because I think what I've noticed is when we have a collective vision, we're all coming together. We're pooling our resources instead of competing.
I love it.
And then we're doing and accelerating more in the kingdom than we ever would have if we had not kind of put our eyes up.
You guys were both at IF. And did you hear Jenny speak from the stage? Jenny Allen, she said from the stage, I'm going to butcher it, but she said something like, you know, how would your life look different if you knew that Jesus was coming back in 10 years? And she said from the stage as well, she's like, and if I'm wrong, who cares? Like, then we've given our entire life to the gospel. Like, she's like, I'd rather be wrong on the front lines than,
that's good.
You know what I mean? Than just sitting in the back waiting.
Yeah.
And I was with her at another thing after that, a little bit more intimate, not from the stage. And she posed the same question to a group of leaders. And I'm telling you, it is really like kind of messing with me a little bit of just like, what would that look like for our lives? Like, if you knew, if you're, and we don't know. No one's proclaiming. No one's giving a statement. Like, everyone calm down. But if we lived our lives in a way that was like, what would it change? What would it change about your life?
Yeah.
And it's a really, really hard, intense, uncomfortable, amazing, beautiful question to sit with.
Yeah. And to me, when you hear trickles of that, I think that I'd heard it first from one of our teammates or Rick Warren kind of saying that. And when you hear that, wherever you're hearing it, like where you keep hearing things, there's like a theme, I guess, in the way that that we see the Lord moving, which I think is really powerful. And what I think it's done to me, and maybe not that exactly, but just in my time with the Lord, where I've been sensing and moving in this space is John 4, where Jesus is tired and weary, and he's working through a region. He has to go through Samaria, and he meets this woman at the well. His disciples come after. He has this beautiful dynamic interaction with this woman at the well, and then his disciples come, and he says, "Lift up your eyes. Can't you see? The fields are white for harvest." And that's what I keep hearing is lift up your eyes. Like, what if we all collect? And I think that's what that question does. What you're just describing with Jenny asking. It's like, it's calling us lifting up our eyes a little bit to see this global, like this narrative of God from the beginning. Because it's not like a new thing. Yeah. It's such a God thing. And sometimes he just needs us to have those people in our lives or in our generation who are calling us to lift up our eyes, to keep us from just doing our thing, to see what like is the God thing that's kind of happening. Yeah. And that helped me a lot, as just going, I want to live like that. Yeah. Like, sign me up.
Yeah. And I hope in these 4 episodes, like my hope for people is that they'll see, what is it for me? You know, when you were 22, you went. I have a really big like suspicion that of all the 4 people that have been on this show so far, talking about unreached people groups, that all of you would go in a heartbeat if God asked you to. But for some people, it is creating businesses. For some people, it's taking what you're doing right now, and maybe you travel to an unreached people group for business work. Well, what does that look like for you? You know, like you travel to East Asia every 6 months on a business trip.
Exactly.
Well, how does that change the way you interact with people? Yes. And for me, it was like, man, what can I do to elevate voices of people? Wow. Okay, so this all came from David's book. So you're reading David's book. Yeah. I love it. Anything else, or is that what you're reading right now?
Yeah, I'm reading David Platt's book. I just got done reading Up From Slavery, or listening on Audible by Booker T. Washington. My mentor was impacted by him significantly, and he was like, why don't you read this book? And so just the compassion, the audacity of vision, is what it just kind of clarified for me there. So I was just super compelled by that.
I love it.
Chewed on that a lot.
I love it.
Wrestled through that. And then I just got done not too long ago. We did a book club with Activate Global on women who risk, which is an absolute incredible book. This book's amazing.
So I brought this in here to the interview because you had sent me a copy, and so I wanted to thank you for it. But I also wanted you to talk about it for a second because, like I told you before we started recording, I've had this book on my bookshelf for a long time, and it's been a book that has been like, read this one day, read this one day, read this one day. And then when you sent it to me, I was like, I think this is like I should read this right now. So I'm going to read this next. So tell us a little bit about this book.
This is Tom and Joanne Doyle. Incredible just ability to storytell what Jesus is doing to literally meet people, particularly in the Middle East and places that we would go, Jesus, are you doing anything there? Right. Yes. Jesus is dynamically intersecting in the lives of people to draw people to himself. Women who are stepping out, Jesus is meeting them. It's just stories that what it did in me. I mean, I just got done reading, I always hear from people about chapter 3. So I'm like, okay. and they're like, what? And it's like a book where you just want to throw it on the floor in a good way. Because it's called
Marry Him or Your Mother Dies.
Right?
This sounds like a fiction, like turn into a movie.
Yeah. It's so good. It's like one of those books where you're just like, Lord, you're doing this? This is our, and it was a part of me was like a little jealous, right? I'm like, oh, I want you to do this in my life, But I'm like, you're doing this in people's lives. This is how much you care about your people. You're real. And it helped me on days where I'm like, I think we all have days where like, Lord, where are you? Like just pinpointing your activity in our own lives. There's something about testimony that you're like, whoa, Jesus is alive. And that's what it did to me. It just increased my faith.
I love it.
Just to believe God for more and just to be blessed by what he's doing through these stories. Unreal, actually.
Well, I said I've had it on my shelf for years, but I just saw it came out in 2021. So I think I've had it on my shelf since 2021. It's 2 years. It feels like a long time. I second everything you said. I always say stories change the world, and that's what we see. Speaking of the Samaritan woman, when she's like, I am the Messiah, she goes back to her village and tells everyone what happened, and it says that many believed in that village because of her story.
Surely you're the savior of the world.
Yes, and many believe because of the testimony that she gave them, and I think that is so. It's good for our faith to see what God's doing around the world. So good. Jess, it's been a joy. Thank you for coming to Austin. Thank you for sharing about what you guys have created and are doing around the world. And it is an honor to elevate what you're doing and to really bring awareness to not only what you're doing, but to what is happening around the world. And I hope that has run true in all 4 of these episodes, is that God is moving mightily around the world.
He is. And Jamie, it's such a... There's so many times where kind of us, in the niche kind of unreached people group world where you're just like, would people just speak their reality? Would we just speak of the things that are happening, but also the gravity of the task ahead of us? And so I'm just so thankful that the Lord is just moving through you and everybody listening. Like, I just think that there's so much on the other side of our obedience that is like gonna bless just in ways that people maybe can't even understand. So just thankful to be here and just be a small part of a bigger picture together.
I love it. If you guys missed any of the episodes last week, David Platt was on, Stephen Morales, they both work for Radical, and on Wednesday of this week, Andy Campman was on, and today you. And don't forget, guys, go over to Instagram. We're gonna give away some bags. So Jess, thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.